I'm absolutely happy to be here to share some of the things I wish I'd known years and years ago when I became a product manager about how to communicate and explain your product strategy. So today I'm going to follow this flow, starting with a review of what is product strategy. If you haven't had a chance to see the previous sessions, I'm going to start with a review of some of the concepts about why we create product strategy and what it actually is and how you can use it, followed by some frameworks that you can use to generate product strategy. I've always found that having multiple approaches to develop the strategy can be really helpful. So I'll share a few. I'm interested to see what the audience has tried before as well. So I do have some opportunities for some collaboration here so we can share ideas about what's worked for all of us. Next, I want to talk about how we connect and integrate product strategy with the business model. A good strategy without a solid business model for the product is definitely not a good idea. We want to have some recipe for success, and the business model is one way to get there. And then the main focus of the presentation, how do we communicate the product strategy in various ways, different methods for doing that, and also some actions we can take on a very daily, pragmatic basis by which we can continually reinforce the product strategy we spend so much time developing. I'll wrap everything up with a summary and then provide an opportunity for lots of questions and answers. And I actually do want to start with a question. So just so I have some sense of where everyone might be, I do want to start with a question for you to answer in the chat window, which is, how well can you state your product strategy today? If it's extremely clear or your communication is very clear, it's a 5 or a 4. If you can state your product strategy clearly, average a 3. Not clearly enough. If you're here so you can find some better ways, a 2. Or if it's just poorly, you struggle with it, it's a 1. So in the chat box, if you enter 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1, that'd be really helpful.
Absolutely. So we're already getting a great influx of answers here. Most of these answers are coming in with 3s and 2s with a couple of 1s peppered in. And we have one person who is at a 4. So that is awesome to hear. But for the most part, 3s and 2s are what we're seeing.
Great. That's good to know, because that means that this will be helpful, and we'll be happy to share this presentation with everyone because there are some useful visualizations and some links and some sources that you can use as a follow-up, because we can only really scratch the surface here on some of these concepts. So good. Glad to know that all this preparation has been useful. So let's get started with what is product strategy. So again, reviewing from some of the other webinars in this series, product strategy describes how we will actually achieve the product vision. We provide a lot more detail about how to make the vision real. This provides an excellent framework for decision making. And when we get to the end and talk about communication, it really allows us to focus and be really refined in how we think about execution, because this focuses effort. Good product strategy really allows focus, allows you to stay on track, allows you to generate the business outcomes and results that you're trying to achieve. And then also it informs the tactics for execution, and will clearly visualize the difference between vision, strategy, and tactics as we move forward in some of the future slides. And I want to start by illustrating the connection between vision and strategy. And I like the idea of a loop here, an infinite loop that connects the vision, which tends to be more aspirational and inspirational and perpetual, meaning that the vision can last for years, in some cases decades, whereas the strategy is more intentional. It's very specific, but it's also adaptive. So I can maintain the same vision and shift and change my strategy to adapt to changing circumstances, both internally and due to any external events. But these are closely linked. I want to make sure that I do have alignment between my vision and strategy, but the strategy is going to be a lot more detailed, whereas the vision can be almost lofty in how it's describing a future state for our customers and other stakeholders. But strategy is needed in context. So this great quote by Stephen Bungay, who writes a lot and talks a lot about strategy, is that strategy is only needed in a very specific context. When you're trying to achieve a particular aim with limited resources against some form of opposition. And while this idea sounds a bit uh, confrontational, it actually is, in the context of product strategy, actually quite generative. We can think about the particular aim as the vision, and we always have limited resources. We're constrained either by time or money or some other constraint, and we always have to think about the opposition, whether it's a competitor or in some cases, the current state of our clients, what situation they're in, and we're trying to create a better outcome for them. That alone is what we're trying to overcome, is the inertia about adopting a better solution. And that's when we need the strategy. So when we have an objective, a vision, and we have limited resources, strategy can be very powerful. Now, again, a good strategy is realistic and coherent. It's intentional. And this is a great image, again, from Stephen Bungay, that illustrates this idea of how to create competitive advantage through your strategy. First, the aim. Do we want to do this? Have we sufficiently identified the vision that we want to achieve and the objectives that allow us to get there? And then, is it possible to do this? Is it feasible? Are there capabilities that we can actually offer? These three corners of the triangle really are the enablers for the context that we require for a coherent and realistic strategy. A good strategy also provides focus. And this quote from Richard Rummel is excellent for describing this idea of focus. Good strategy works by focusing the energy and resources on one or a very few pivotal objectives whose accomplishment will lead to a cascade of favorable outcomes. And those outcomes are both for our customers as well for us who are providing the solution. So this idea of focusing energy and resources, again, focusing time, investment, our people and our energy, so we can achieve the outcomes that are important. So the strategy contains the objectives that are necessary to achieve our vision. Now, strategy and tactics are definitely mutually dependent. And I'm going to go to Sun Tzu, a great writer about all things related to strategy. But in this case, it applies very well for product management. Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is noise before defeat. So if we try to create a strategy and we don't have a good plan for execution, we're going to have a very difficult time. We may run out of resources. The tactics without a strategy won't work. We're not going to achieve our outcome if we don't have strategy and we just try to execute. So creating a strategy is required to begin execution. Now, I want to emphasize the relationship of time when we think about these different components of product thinking. So vision, strategy, and tactics have very different varying time horizons, and they are context dependent. So I'll give some examples. First, I want to illustrate vision, this idea of vision being long lasting, in some ways perpetual, potentially for the entire life of the product. Once we've established a vision, then we start creating the strategy. But the time horizon for strategy really may just be years. For a new software startup in Silicon Valley, the strategy may only have a time horizon of a year or two, whereas for more established companies, may be much longer. In speaking to some colleagues at Western Digital who provide storage products, they have strategic plans that extend 10 and maybe even out 15 years. That is their cycle of strategic thinking to be adaptive to the requirements of their customers who purchase their hardware storage solutions. And further, unlike vision, the strategy may shift and change as needed over time, so we continually refresh and refine our strategy over some time interval. Next is tactics, and tactics we break down into weeks or even months. Tactics are the detailed execution of the strategy. So from my background in thinking about Scrum within Agile framework, I may think about the tactics of my sprint execution. What am I planning to accomplish each sprint leading up to a larger release objective that's again in support of the strategy. So the tactical planning and tactical execution happens in a much shorter time frame, but they're all interconnected. as I use this type of thinking, I want to ensure that there's some connection between the goals I established for release, as well as the goals I established for the sprint, all then aligned up to my strategic objectives. So, what are some frameworks to generate product strategy? I want to start with one that's very powerful and visual, but also adds some ability to provide context. And that is Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. It's a great tool for describing the strategy because it starts with why. Why is the purpose or vision that we're pursuing important to customers? Once we describe that, then we can actually identify the strategy. How will we achieve that purpose? And what's going to make our product special or set apart from the competition or any other alternatives? Then we get into the what. What solutions will you create and how will they be created? So this very elegant framework allows us to really focus in on the how and how is connected to the why. So this type of framework is very powerful, but don't rush it. This is something that can take a number of weeks to develop with multiple opportunities for people to collaborate and discuss and refine over time. And I'll share an example in a moment. The next is a hierarchical relationship. It's a more text-based type of relationship. And this example actually connects a few different concepts. So we can start with the mission for the company. So what is the company's mission or the company strategy? Then what are the values of the organization? And then for my specific product, what is the vision that I have for the product? And then I connect into the strategy with the similar elements. What are my objectives? In which domain will I participate? Which customer segments will I try to pursue? Followed by what are my advantages? What are my competitive advantages that allow me to offer a better solution than any other alternative? And then in this instance, for this example, there are some metrics to track with the balanced scorecard. Now, as you can see from the source, this is from the Harvard Business Review. In this case, the authors emphasize that having some method by which to measure your results is important as you're creating the strategy. So it allows you to actually have some measurable outcomes. For some of you, objectives and key results may fit even better than balanced scorecard, where you can actually track your performance of your execution to achieve your strategy. Another option for a framework to generate your strategy is called strategic sweet spot. Now, I like this one because, again, it's very visual. And this type of framework would be very useful for multiple people to collaborate to fill in and discuss together. So first is the context. In which area do you want to compete? Which customer segments are important in the context of the vision that you're pursuing? So that actually helps to constrain the problem space. Next, you think about your customers' needs, overlay with your competitors' offerings and your own capabilities. So the sweet spot is the space in the middle in red. But as you think about this from a strategic point of view and from a tactical point of view, you may want to think about as well which capabilities you actually need to develop that will allow you to compete with your competitors. So when you think about this space here, if your competitors offer this, and you may need to offer the same type of capabilities and features and benefits to your customers just to be able to compete to satisfy your customer needs. Where you're really going to win is the red area. So although these sections aren't in red, you still may need to develop the similar capabilities as your competitors so you compete strategically with your competitors. But this is where you're really going to win because your competitors don't have those offerings. So really helpful framework. Again, this is done best with multiple people. You don't have to do this alone. When we used this framework, we did it together over about 3 sessions. We did it the first time adding Post-it notes, and we did this virtually using Miro as our tool to effectively create a virtual whiteboard to add virtual Post-it notes and to talk through how we were thinking about our capabilities and needs and competitors. And we came back a few times. As we processed things, we realized we missed some things. We had made some adjustments. The nice thing about this is it identified opportunities for us to develop even more competitive advantage by identifying those capabilities that we could develop that our competitors didn't have. So I want to walk through an example of the golden circle just to illustrate how to create this. Now, as we built our golden circle, we coordinated, I'd say, about 8 different sessions with multiple participants from our company. And at the time, there were about 18 of us, so we scheduled different times throughout the week, some in the morning, some in the evening, but allowed everyone to participate. And I think that was important for us at our company size to have different points of view and perspectives to weigh in. So over time, we refined this golden circle multiple times. So what I'm going to show you is the result of several hours over multiple weeks to achieve what we believe is a complete golden circle. So first we started with our why. And what we've recognized over the past few years is that one of the key results, key inputs to success for companies to achieve their results is sustainability. So we start with our why. We believe that every company must become a sustainable business. For our how, we focused on profitability as the fuel for sustainability. Profit fuels sustainability, and we apply systems thinking to the art and science of creating profitable software-enabled products. So as you can see, we have a very specific set of customer segments. So any customer who is using software to power their business qualifies. We're not limiting to only software vendors, but any type of organization that leverages software to enable their products. For example, we have some customers who sell hardware devices that are driven by software capabilities. Our what is that we provide consulting and training for Scrum Safe on our own unique profit stream framework. So as you can see, our strategic intention is to provide the solution specifically with systems thinking to create those profitable products with our customers. And it all aligns to our vision. So this could be a very short form like this, or it could be a little bit more detailed, and again, built most successfully when multiple people interact and collaborate together. So I'm going to pause there and ask another question. Now that I've shown 3 frameworks to generate product strategy, what other frameworks has anyone used or do they know that can generate strategy? So Rayvon, are you seeing any results?
Not yet. Go ahead and get your answers in on what other frameworks do you know to generate product strategy. Put those in the chat box and I'll make sure to see what they are. Ooh, we're finally getting some answers in. I have Kevin who says product canvas, Michelle that says mind mapping, add pricing strategy, North Star metric.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
then someone else says none really. We wing it with our own methods.
Yeah, North Star is great. I love that approach. And Amplitude, I know, talks a lot about North Star metrics as a way to craft strategy and connect those to the OKRs so you actually have measurements. Canvases are great. And mind mapping is excellent. I think mind mapping actually is a great tool that is very visual that would then allow you to connect back to define and refine the objectives and, again, the target conditions for your various customer segments. So great. Thanks for sharing those. So now we've looked at some frameworks to generate strategy. I do want to now cover the key integration between the business model and the product strategy. So the way I'm going to do this is with a canvas of our own, where we describe the business model of a software product. And this is specific to software-enabled products and services. So this could be modified in many different ways for different domains. But the area that I think is most important to integrate between the strategy and the business model is really this top row. So when we think about strategy, we're really thinking about how customers perceive value. If we have objectives that aren't aligned to how customers perceive value, we're going to have a problem with the business model. Similarly, when we think about how our customers perceive value, that allows us to define how will we exchange value for money with our customers. So for example, if we're building a solution that is used frequently throughout the week, throughout the month, every month, for example, like QuickBooks Online. Well, that's something that we use all the time to run invoices daily and to generate weekly reports. We think about that frequency, time-based frequency of usage from our solution and for our customer usage pattern, a time-based access model is going to work best to create a subscription model. So our subscription model that we've created for our business model now aligns to our strategic objective of providing financial solutions to small and medium-sized businesses with QuickBooks. This also then connects to pricing. So this top layer can be very helpful for ensuring that we have the integration that we need between the business model and the strategy. The other elements of the business model can be built out once you've defined a top layer so you can ensure that you can actually execute on your strategy. And if you've defined the right price points, for example, for your customers to recognize the return on investment they expect, and then on the business ROI side, have you created a viable business? So price levels that your customers will accept and deliver the appropriate level of value sufficient for you to have a viable business model. The profit stream in the middle is the most interesting because then you can start thinking about strategically over time how you can add more and more capabilities that may generate other opportunities for more value for customers and additional revenue and profitability for the organization. So from our point of view, since I showed you our golden circle, when we think about this type of framework, it's going to actually help us to fulfill what we see as profitability fueling the sustainability that our organizations are seeking. So they can have long-lived products and success. So that's the integration. So now I'll move on to the core elements of how to ensure that you can effectively communicate your product strategy. So first, I want to consider the elephant in the rider. And I really like this metaphor for thinking about how people respond to communication. So this metaphor starts with the rider, and the rider is our rational, analytical mind, how we receive and process things very rationally. And it's when we communicate and try to appeal to people's logic. On the other hand, the elephant is more emotional and potentially reactive. So while we may have a very logical statement that is very clear and potentially compelling, if people are afraid and unsure and uncertain and unclear, they may react negatively. So we want to make sure that we can both appeal to the analytical response as much as the emotional response. And the elephant and rider metaphor is so powerful because the elephant is so much bigger and stronger. So we need to actually make sure we never forget that there's going to be an emotional response. As a result, when we think about communication of product strategy, we do want to ensure we have some balance so people can clearly grasp what we're trying to communicate in a way that connects as much rationally as it does emotionally. So that's what I'm going to emphasize as I go through a few of these techniques to effectively communicate your strategy. So first, I want to start with the strategy statement. So here's one format that you can use, and it's certainly not the only format that you can use to communicate your strategy in a very sequenced, logical approach. First is stating your target customers. So for, and then you insert your target customers or customer segments. So for companies that have software-enabled products and services, then you state the problem. Who are dissatisfied with their current state, their current solution, their current products or services. Our product is, and this is a very short statement, usually 2 to 4 words, our product is a mobile application. Our product is a hardware device. Our product is a web-based service that provides a key defensible problem-solving capability. And this is probably the most important line to get right. So let me talk about defensible. A defensible problem-solving capability is the key differentiator that is hard to copy without extreme expense. So it may be your unique value proposition that nobody else currently has. So our product is a web-based application that provides automated business model generation. That would be our ultimate automation solution for product management. Excuse me. Then we follow that up with unlike any existing product alternatives. So unlike our competitors or unlike the customer's current state, our product provides 2 or 3 key product capabilities or features that will allow you to differentiate. So it may be some new technology, some new algorithms, maybe some specific features that your competitors don't offer that are not quite as important as your key problem-solving capability. So a very well-structured format, works very well, and as you can see, it sort of tells the story as you go along, which is, again, is both satisfying from an analytical, logical point of view, because you have the structure. From an emotional, reactive point of view, it's a lot easier to consume. And this link comes from, this statement format comes from Regis McKenna, which was popularized by Jeffrey Moore in his book Crossing the Chasm. And the link to learn more about this type of statement is available there at the bottom of the screen. But very powerful. I've used it many times ourselves internally, as well as with several of our clients and customers. So next, I want to move on to something that's more visual, which is a strategic roadmap. So I'm going to walk through a pattern for strategic road mapping. I want to start with a fundamental grid, and there's many different ways to lay out the grid. This is a very popular way. We're not tied yet to specific time frames where we just have simply a now, next, and later, which sort of establishes enough time-space relationship without trying to lock into a particular deadline. But I want to start first with how we're going to segment the market. And here's where you can actually visualize and in effect, bring to life how you intend to pursue different market segments. So the problem statement is, how do I segment the market? The solution is to create a visual representation of the segments you're targeting over time. And this is what we call a pattern of market mapping. So the market map is the first row, and we'll start by adding, in this case, the insurance segment as the first market we want to pursue. And then maybe we're thinking the next market segment we want to look at is banking. And then we have this idea in the future of the same type of solution appealing to shipping companies. So next problem is, well, what is the right frame of reference of time for the problem domain? How do our different customer segments think about time? So in this case, then we want to identify the specific events and rhythms for the different market segments. And that is what we call the market events and rhythms. So in this case, we may know of a particular conference and a whole lot of energy every year around a particular conference for the insurance industry, where the various companies go to select vendors and build new relationships, and that tends to generate a certain seasonality to the business. Similarly, think about banking. Well, banking is affected by any type of issuance of new regulations, and we want to be aware of that, and that may cause how we think about delivering value to that particular segment. In the shipping industry, we want to be very sensitive to how important it is to provide solutions to allow them to deal with the holiday season and be prepared for that. So once we have that idea, we can start thinking about the market windows by which we can serve the different customer segments over time. Next, how do we ensure that the right solutions are solved for the different target audiences? And that starts with creating a map of the proposed solutions and associated features and benefits. And you tie those to the segments you're targeting. So that is the feature and benefits map. It can also be called the opportunities map that you want to explore to ensure you're providing the right solutions. So this is where we layer in the various features or opportunities over the different time horizons for the different segments. Now, if I saw, for instance, that I wanted to think about feature development that may apply to more than one particular segment, I may have something like this, which illustrates that these features are specific to the different segments, which can be a really useful tool for providing more and more clarity for the people who are trying to read and consume the strategic roadmap that I'm building out. So next is, how do I manage the evolution of the technical architecture? And I do want to refer back to this as well as we get to the end, but it's very important that we stay aligned with our technical counterparts who are going to be working with us to develop the product. So the architects and the development teams, all the engineers, I want to make sure we have alignment. So the problem of maintaining alignment, the solution is to create a map of any known technology trends or other specific well-known changes that we intend to make. This is called the technical architecture map. So as we layer that in, now we're thinking about, maybe the first step is to remove some existing technical debt. Maybe we want to next explore some new technology implementation that will improve our product. In the future, we want to provide some enhancement to some existing services. So providing this opportunity to communicate across these different domains of thinking is very powerful. So when I think about the market map, I definitely want to be inclusive of both sales and marketing to ensure we're aligned on which specific segments we're going to pursue over time. Similarly, I'm going to rely on marketing expertise to think about events and rhythms, both with our customers as well as the entire marketplace, and potentially any competitive moves that we may anticipate. And likewise, definitely want to engage engineering. So the good news is that you don't have to build this type of roadmap alone. Collaboration is definitely a theme of almost everything I'm talking about, as this type of roadmap is best built collaboratively with multiple stakeholders working with you. You're definitely the leader and coordinator and facilitator of the engagement of these different groups, but their different perspectives and insights actually lead to healthier alignment, which will make your life a lot easier when you start executing, because now you can refer back to what you previously worked out on the roadmap as you get into the day-to-day execution. And the SlideShare link there will allow you to view the entire chapter. Describes this pattern on strategic road mapping in a lot more detail, provided by our colleague Luke Homan. So very powerful tool, works great online with tools like Miro and Mural, but also when you're doing this in person, works great on a big wall or whiteboard where you can all work together to build this out over probably a number of hours, and then come back and update it on some frequency, typically quarterly. So next, I want to first frame up Agile Principle number 10, which is one of my favorite principles, but it's very counterintuitive. So simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. So this idea of maximizing the amount of work not done is kind of striking, but it actually is very powerful. And what this refers back to is the focus that a good strategy will provide. Similarly, when you think about the day-to-day execution, eliminate anything that is unnecessary. That is emphasizing this idea of the amount of work not done. So if you're guessing at what you should be developing and you don't have market research, don't do that. If you've got requests that you're receiving that are not aligned to the strategy, defer them. So the day-to-day execution, the day-to-day actions are ways by which you can continuously communicate your product strategy. And that can occur through how you think about your backlog. So if you're thinking about, if you're using Agile frameworks, your backlog is a great way to communicate your strategy by all the things you remove. So what requests are you rejecting because they're not important in the context of your strategy? This is almost like a ruthless elimination of anything that is not aligned with the strategy. So it becomes a really important filter for how you think about the ongoing execution and development of your product. If you're not using Agile and you're using some other technique, review your requirements and think through, is this actually aligned to strategy? Do we actually have to do this? What evidence do we have that providing this particular capability or solution to a problem that's specific to our customers do we have? If we don't have that information, if it's not aligned to a particular specific strategy, remove it. That can happen in many different ways. You may actually get requests for pursuing a new customer segment that's not part of your strategy. That is a very big strategic decision. You probably don't want to immediately accept that request. You want to actually ponder that and consider, okay, the next strategic update, should we think about whether or not we should pursue the segment? In some cases, the best strategic decision is not to expand and maintain focus. Another way to communicate your strategy is through how you think about your short-term goals on a frequent cadence. And this may start with your product goals or release goals. So your interim objectives to complete the strategy may be in how you think about those specific goals, ensuring those goals are aligned, and in some ways reinforcing your strategy as you're communicating those interim goals for releases. Similarly, when you think about sprint goals, again, going back to Scrum, every sprint we can think about how does this particular outcome of the sprint, the reason we're doing this work, connect to the strategy. So there's almost a cascading relationship between strategy or strategic goals to release goals to sprint goals. And this could be applied to a whole lot of other frameworks. If you talk in terms of iterations, the same concept applies. What's your goal for this iteration? How does that connect to the strategy? And it's not just the detailed work that you're doing, but why that work is so valuable. That value statement allows you to then see how the connection exists with the strategy. And then talk about it. Repeat the strategy frequently. This is one concept that cannot be over communicated, almost to the point where everyone can say what the strategy is. And that's great. We actually want the developers and testers and designers and anyone else involved in developing the product to be able to say, this is our product strategy. Here's how the work that I'm doing today is valuable as we're on our journey to achieve our product strategy. So as a product manager, as a product leader, as a product owner, you have many, many opportunities to continually reinforce your strategy, which is why it's so important to refine it so it's clear, concise, and short and sticky so people will understand it and be able to repeat it themselves and embed it into the work they do every day. So in summary, product strategy describes how the product vision will be achieved. So the detailed objectives, specific markets you're going to achieve, and the aim to what you want to accomplish with your vision. 3 possible frameworks beyond the great ones that you also identified: golden circle, a hierarchy, or the strategic sweet spot are great frameworks to help generate product strategy collaboratively, and then maintain the alignment between your strategy and business model. Ensure that you actually have a viable model when you think about pricing and how customers are willing to pay for your product, all definitely connected to your strategy. And finally, you can effectively communicate your strategy through both text, images, as well as frequent dialogue. So maintain the dialogue. So what questions can I answer? What questions have arrived?
That was such a fantastic presentation there. Thank you so much. Before we dive into questions, I want to remind everyone that now is the time to get straight from the source insight from Jason. Great questions contribute to a great webinar, so don't forget to submit your questions. Additionally, we understand if you need to run. Don't worry, today's session is being recorded and will be emailed to you in the next 48 hours. All righty. So we have so many questions coming through. This first one is coming in from Michelle. She says, how often should you reevaluate your strategy?
Yes, great question. I'm glad I thought about that before the talk. So I think that the 2 intervals for refreshing the strategy, I think a cadence is really important. So planning a strategic review is important, and I would probably recommend quarterly. And the second trigger for a strategic review is external events. So the introduction of some new technology may cause an ad hoc strategic review. Any particular competitive move may cause a quick strategic review. And I believe we're possibly at a time now where the economic environment is going to cause a lot of people to rethink their product strategy very quickly. What are the short-term strategic objectives that may need to be identified and quickly switched right now to allow us to weather what might be an economic downturn that's coming? All 3 of those type of external events may cause sort of this non-cadence change to strategy. But overall, I plan probably quarterly. As you're refreshing your roadmap, revisit the strategy. What does our strategy need to change this quarter or not? If not, let's plan how we're going to continue executing. If so, make some adjustments.
That was a fantastic answer. Thank you so much, Jason. And Michelle, if you do happen to have any follow-ups to that, go ahead and put that into the chat and we'll make sure to get through it here. For our next question, it's coming in from Tim. First, he says, thank you. Then he says, what common mistakes do you see when creating product strategies?
I think the first is tending to be too long, which typically is an indicator of a lack of focus, which is easy to do. So being very disciplined and focused is a challenge. So keeping it short and focused, I think, is the first mistake. Second is being a bit too ambiguous. So while the vision can be very aspirational and broad, I think the strategy needs to be a lot more specific. So avoiding ambiguity, I think, is a key. And I think the third is not thinking carefully enough about segmentation. To say we're going to provide a solution to everybody who has a phone is unrealistic. Who do we want to strategically pursue as our initial customer segment, I think, is absolutely vital. Sometimes that may be based on proximity. So if I'm located in North Carolina, if I was actually going to try to uh, provide a new product or service, I probably would be best served to start right here where I have easy access to the particular segment of people I want to pursue. And then I can expand from there once I have proven my solution. So all too often I see this really wide net cast in strategy statements, whereas I think focusing on one or just a few customer segments would be a whole lot more powerful.
Another great answer there. And thank you so much for that question. If you do have any follow ups, go ahead and put that into the chat as well. This next question is coming in from David. He says, how do you get leadership to buy into this type of filtering of things that do not align with the strategy?
Well, I think it starts with ensuring when you create the strategy that they're aligned to the strategy, because then when they have the request that we can have the discussion about whether or not we want to adapt our strategy or not. I think that provokes a conversation about, are we actually shifting our strategy? Do we want to be intentional about changing the strategy or not? Because you're right, they are leaders, right? They could be our managers, our bosses, and we may have to work through that with them and not just say no. Say, no, this is not aligned to our strategy. Let's talk about whether or not we want to adjust our strategy. And that may be a leadership decision that they do want to make, but let's be really clear and intentional about making that change. So I think that the pushback is actually a conversation that can be actually quite powerful and providing the context for them to reevaluate what they're actually asking, which is challenging because as things get difficult, they very quickly want to make a quick decision about making a quick change, a quick exception for a particular request while realizing this is going to take us down a path that we may not want to go down. So I think just asking the question is the starting point. I'd be happy to answer follow-up if any of that was unclear.
Absolutely. Again, go ahead and put your follow up questions into the chat, especially if you need clarity on such a great answer there. I have another great question coming in from Michelle. She says, given uncertainties with supply chain, economic upheaval, cultural changes, do you think it would be beneficial to have a plan A, B, and C and have, all these in place just in case?
Oh, I love that. I love the idea of scenario planning. In fact, that's something we're going to do in the middle of June is talk through some different scenarios. And if you haven't heard of Guy Kawasaki's Remarkable People podcast, he interviewed Jane McGonigal recently, a very short, I think it's less than an hour podcast. And what Jane talked about was that they did some future planning games because Jane is all about gaming. But about actually, I think about 5 years ago, they ran some simulations, some scenario games based on a global pandemic. And they followed up with the people who participated in that game after the pandemic started. And those people who participated in a game were much more relaxed and much less stressed during COVID because they had gone through the scenario planning. They had discussed it and thought about these potential outcomes. So I actually think that talking through plan A, B, and C, and even D allows us to think about how we might respond I think it mentally prepares us for these possible bad events that may occur so we can be more adaptive and responsive if they do occur. So talked about mind mapping, I would almost do some decision trees. So if this happens, what do we do? And what's our probability assessment of those different outcomes? So a probability assessment with a decision tree be a great way to walk through some scenario planning, which I think would be really powerful. It's a great idea.
Absolutely. Such a great question there, Michelle. Thank you so much for that. Moving on to this next question, it's coming in from Emily. And I believe this one is in reference to that slide that you had about the sweet spot of where you want to be. So she says, what can a product manager do in a company where there's either an absence of a strong vision or the customer feedback does not align with the vision?
There's an absence of, first, the company doesn't have a vision. I've actually seen that quite a lot, particularly in the article I referenced about, can you say what your strategy is? So I actually think that that article that is mentioned in the source from Harvard Business Review is a great place to start, to actually motivate the conversation about what our vision is. Second, I think that the customer feedback, there's a lot that can be done, what we call dialing for dollars. I look at my LinkedIn connections and look for titles of product managers. And first I figure out like, how am I connected? And then I reach out and ask questions, and having that conversation, actually, as scary as it is to call, actually have been some really great conversations. What's happening? What's new? How are you thinking about these problems? What sort of challenges are you facing? Those actually are probably the most powerful conversations that you can have. And there's an old saying, I think I'm not sure who it's attributed to, nothing interesting happens in the office. So nothing interesting happens in the home office. However, a lot of interesting things can happen when you pick up the phone and call. So I'd say go gather the feedback, and that would be primary research. I think there's also a lot of secondary research or desk research you can do that can allow you to gather some insights. And it is hard work. I think that the hard thing to do is to find the time to do it, but it's super valuable. Now, if you're being prevented from getting access to customers, that's harder. Working through that and describing how you need the access and building the trust. Maybe you need to jointly call. So, for example, if marketing or customer relationship owners are blocking, saying, no, I talk to customers, I'll tell you what they need. Say, hey, maybe could you let me listen in on some of those conversations? It'd be a great way to get some of those insights and feedback.
Great question there, Emily, and that was a fantastic answer, Jason. We have quite a few people coming in and saying thank you for that answer there. I also just want to remind everyone, if you do have any clarification questions, go ahead and get that into the chat. Well, with our last few minutes here, I believe I have a couple more questions coming in. This first one is coming in from John, and he wants to know if you can share any resources or where to go to better help with these frameworks for creating a product strategy.
Sure. So I did embed the links to where to find these throughout the presentation. So we'll be providing the file here. Rayvon, is that something that you can provide as a download?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for example, you can grab this here. Also, our website, appliedframeworks.com, we do maintain a whole series of frameworks. So if you just search frameworks at our website, you can access them as well.
So great to hear. Thank you for that. And for this last question that we have, and it's coming in from Andrea. She says, do you have any other examples of a strategic roadmap that you could share?
I did. There's actually an entire series of blog posts, and you can actually download this template also from our website. So if you just go to our website and search road mapping, a whole lot will pop up, including an additional 2 webinars that we've done about road mapping at scale. And they're all featured right on our site.
Great, thank you for that. And Andrea, if you have any more questions about that, go ahead and put that into the chat. For our last question, and it's kind of going back to that product vision question that came in from Emily. This person says, can a product leader still define a product vision in lieu of a company vision? So very interesting question here. So I'm curious how you feel about that.
I think it's possible, but challenging. So, and the reason I say that is I'm going to have some mechanism by which to fund the development. So when I think about the company as the financial resources for the investment required in the staffing, in the software, the development environments, whether it's cloud or data center, I've got to get access to that financial resources. As a result, when I'm making the request, I've got to say, here's why this is valuable to the company. Now, if the company doesn't have a vision of his, we're here for technology solutions, and you've got a vision, I think it's effectively creating the business case, which I think that profit stream framework tool would be a great way to identify. Here's our business model. Here is valuable to our potentially vague company vision. But I actually think about it the other way around. I actually want to make sure my strategy is aligned to my company vision. But if in the lieu of a company vision, it's quite challenging. That's how I'd approach it. Here's my business case. Here's why I think it's valuable to the company to generate revenue.
Such a great suggestion there. And again, thank you so much for that question. And with that answer, that is all the time that we have for today. I hope everyone here learned as much as I did and had as much fun as I did learning this presentation. Thanks to our sponsor, User Testing. Thank you to all of you for attending, and a big thank you to you, Jason, for putting such an incredibly informative session for us.
Thank you. Appreciate all the questions and comments. So thanks.
Absolutely. And on top of that, if we weren't able to get to your questions today, you can go ahead and reach out to Jason via LinkedIn that we put in the chat, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer more questions for you. I hope everyone has a great Thursday and enjoy the rest of your week.